Hello and good morning. I'm Leonardo McClarty, and I'm the president of the Howard County Chamber, and like to welcome each of you to Coffee and Candidates. And so, this is a forum that the Chamber has been putting together during this legislative season, which allows us to talk to our candidates for public office, both statewide as well as locally, on particularly issues of interest to those that may be in business as well as that reside here in Howard County as well. And so we're excited to have with us Senator Clarence Lamb and Bob Cockey, who are both candidates for Senate District 12. And so for those of you that may not be quite as familiar with Senate District 12, I'll make it easy for you. It's the eastern part of the county in the Elk Ridge area, as well as also going over into that line that straddles Ellicott City and Columbia that depending on which side of the street you're on,
Right.
you're on Ellicott City, or if you go on the other side of the street, you're in Columbia. But it covers all the way down to Howard High School, and certainly over in the area off of 100, where the giant shopping center and the park is, and so forth. So that'll give you the golf course. That'll give you just a general sentiment of the area, and obviously it covers a little bit more than that. But again, that's an idea just for those of you looking for landmarks to determine if you're in this district as well. And so the candidates have been given the questions in advance. Again, this is not something where there are any surprises. This is all about voter education in terms of just where they stand on issues and things. And again, the one thing I always like to say is that the chamber does not endorse candidates. We will advocate for or against policy initiatives, but in terms of picking a candidate in a race, the chamber does not endorse candidates. And so again, with that, we're going to jump into things. And so the way this is going to work is, like I said, I've got some questions I'm going to ask them. We're doing this by last name first, and so Bob's going to go first to get us started, and then Clarence will go first on the very last question. And then we'll just continue to alternate throughout the course and just have a good conversation over probably the next 40 minutes or so. And so with that, because we do have time, because it's just the two of them, Bob, share a little bit about yourself, just kind of introducing yourself to the group. Who is Bob Cockey?
Well, Bob Cockey is a lifelong Maryland resident. I've been a small business person in Maryland for over 40 years. And I'd like to say hi, good morning to Senator Lamb. I feel almost like I know that we've become friends. We've been doing this for 8 years together. We've been in many, many forums together. I feel like he's that neighbor that I became to know. So during the debate, anything I say is nothing against Senator Lamb. I respect the job that he's done. I would just say that I am running because my views on how to accomplish things for the state and for the county is a little bit different. I think a lot of our programs are broken. We need to think outside the box a little bit. And as a businessman, I've had the experience of fixing budgets, working with employees, dealing with the employees' problems. So I think as a representative of the state, you're almost running a very big business. And we don't just represent people of Howard County and Anne Arundel County. We represent over 6 million people that are residents of Maryland. I'd like to start off by saying that my platform was once said by President John F. Kennedy. Seek not the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but the right answer. And that's Bob Cockey.
Excellent. Thank you. And for Senator Lamb, for those that may not know you, just introduce yourself to the group and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thank you, Leonardo, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this morning. It's always great to have an opportunity to have a conversation and also to talk to talk to Bob. We have gotten to know each other quite a while over the last few years, and it's good to always have a friendly conversation, which I think this will be this morning. So for the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to serve in the Senate. 4 years before that, I served in the House of Delegates as well. For my time in the Senate, I've had the privilege of serving on the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. I also chair the Howard County delegation and serve as the Senate chair for the Joint Committee on Audits and Evaluations, as well as the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. So have had the opportunity and the privilege of working on a lot of different things in the legislature. My background is as a physician, so healthcare is obviously near and dear to me. I still see patients every single week, and I also do a lot of teaching. I run a residency program at Johns Hopkins at the School of Public Health. And so whether it's healthcare or education or other issues that are important to the community, I've really tried to get to know all parts of the district. As Leonardo has mentioned, the district, as Bob has mentioned, has changed quite a bit. No longer going into Southwest Baltimore County, but now crossing through Elk Ridge into North Linthicum and North County in Anne Arundel. So a lot going on in the district, but always out there to try to get to know folks and their concerns, and hope to have the privilege to continue to serve.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. And I would say this is one of those things that's certainly interesting when a senator does say that he still sees patients. Oftentimes I can say when we're trying to coordinate things, it's like, okay, I think I've started to learn the schedule as to when you're in the clinic. And although I don't know how you do it between a new baby and teaching and seeing and serving and so forth. And it's definitely, I commend you for the time you give, and Bob commends you for the time you want to give, because it's certainly serving is certainly selfless effort. But I think the next question really gets into some of your top priorities. I think actually, if those that are watching or listening, you kind of hinted at two of them, but share with us, what would be again kind of your top three legislative priorities. And why? And starting with you, Senator Lamb.
Sure. So thank you for that question. I think we've done a good job over the last 4 years to try to help serve the residents of Maryland and also the voters in District 12. But I think looking ahead in the next 4 years, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to touch on some of these priorities too that I'm going to identify here. One, I think, I want to make it easier for working families, for folks who are struggling to make ends meet. We've seen costs rising over the last year, and we also recognize that. And we want to make sure that we help folks who, are on fixed income or unlimited income, or, whose dollars just don't go as far as they used to in the past. We've made some strides over the last few years. For example, we've helped support additional childcare for families. And we think that's important because as individuals go to work, it's sometimes tough to be able to make sure that you have good childcare. As someone who has a 13-month-old, I recognize that firsthand. And we've lost many childcare providers during the pandemic. Thousands of them have left the industry and have closed their doors. That has driven costs up. And we know for a lot of parents who want to work or who are working families that without adequate childcare, they can't get to work. And without reliable childcare, they can't stay at work. And so it's a real challenge that we hope to continue to work on. We've offered childcare tax credits to be able to help some of these centers and providers stay in business, but I think we need to do more, both for the providers and also for the families. I also think that we can help support working families when it comes to their health care. Obviously an issue that is important to me as a physician, but it's important for a lot of families who are struggling to figure out how to pay for the drugs that they need. A few years ago, we set up the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, which was one of the first in the nation to be able to take a top-down look at how we can make drugs more affordable. That board is going to be coming back to us in the next year or two with recommendations on what we can do to bring down not only the cost of prescription drugs, but also generic drugs. So last session, I sponsored legislation that capped the cost of insulin at no more than $1 a day. Very simple drug, long-standing, very effective. Everyone knows that it's used in diabetes treatment, but the costs were rising. And so we're going to take a look at those measures to help bring the cost of drugs and healthcare down for folks, and also for affordable housing. All these are going to help working families. The second part is infrastructure. I think infrastructure not only encompasses what people normally think about infrastructure and rebuilding
I'm
roads
going to ask you just
bridges.
to kind of wrap up just a little,
Sure.
little
All right.
bit. All right.
So, but also human infrastructure too, making sure that we support our educational system. There's a lot going on with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, and what we can do to help support that is really important. And then I'll just close on saying accountability. Accountability is not only important in a Republican administration, but the Democratic administration is bipartisan. We need to make sure the state is spending money well. I've been the chair of Joint Audits Committee, and we'll continue to make sure that we hold everyone accountable for how the money is spent in the state.
Thank you. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit about education and Blueprint. But Bob, if you would share, what would be your top priorities if elected, and why?
Well, I'll tell you, as I stated earlier, or quoted President Kennedy's, seek not the Republican or Democratic answer. I'd like to try to bridge that gap between the two parties. This party bickering has created, such a large section of independent voters. In 12A alone, there's more registered independent voters than there are Republicans. Dr. Lamb knows that I once ran as a Democrat. And to be honest with you, I would do it again. So Maryland is one of 14 states in our country that doesn't allow independents to vote in the primary. And independents, they pay taxes and everything just as much as the Republicans or the Democrats do. And I think that by independents not having a right to vote in the primaries just isn't fair. And I'd like to take a look at that. Also, I would like to think outside the box. And Senator Lamb touched on the fact of medical costs and affordable housing. And I couldn't agree with him more. And when I say think outside the box, affordable housing, I'll use as an example. There's people who get, let's say, $1,500 to $1,800 a month in vouchers. So if we can turn these vouchers into mortgages through workforce development, we take these people, we sign a contract with them, we take their vouchers, let's say for a period of 10 years. So that would produce approximately at a $1,600 a month voucher, almost $200,000. I personally have bought houses for, say, $40,000, spent $10,000 putting in hardwood floors, paint, etc. And we could do the same thing with some of the boarded up and properties that need to be rehabbed. So now once you take that voucher, you've created pride in home ownership for the person. They know that they're part of the community, that they're going to own this house. You, of course, give them some training before they took possession. Like, if your toilet's running, this is what you do. You don't end up with a $1,000 water bill. Things like this are just common sense approaches. For the taxpayer, the voucher goes on forever and ever. With my program turning vouchers into mortgages, the person becomes a home ownership. They become part of the community. And for the taxpayer, the vouchers, it ends after 10 years. I see my time is up.
Well, but I'm going to let you finish your statement. If you had something else that you want, another sentence or two,
Yeah,
I want to give you time for
that. The medical costs and all is part of one of my other answers in another question. This is just crazy. We all want the same thing, but we all deserve the same thing. And on the street, which being in the restaurant and hospitality business, the bar business over the years, I got to know people up close and personal. For somebody living in Howard County and two people are working for Northrop Grumman, bringing home $200,000 a year, if taxes go up a little bit, if there's a little bit of inflation, it doesn't affect them. But for the average person on the street, the saying is the struggle is real. And guess what? I've been there up close and personal. I know that their struggle is real. I know that the kids are getting robbed of an education. I know with inflation and the benefits they receive, it just doesn't work anymore. Thank you for that extra time.
So, Bob, we're going to stay with you first this time, and something that you both have shared some obviously common themes, and while again, you both may say that the approaches perhaps could may be different, but certainly have shared some commonalities, and so we're going to actually move into talking about partisanship, and so I know again both of you have kind of talked a little bit about bipartisanship, but certainly we see that each session often we end up having, it seems that more bills get passed along party lines. And so just talk a little bit about how you would work in a nonpartisan manner with legislators whose party differs from your own. And so again, we'll start with you first, Bob.
Okay, well, I've been around quite a while. Clarence has seen me at different events. People that know me know that I am a bipartisan person. I know lots of delegates. I know lots of senators down there. Matter of fact, most of my friends think that I am a Democrat, and that's okay with me. Like I said earlier, we all want the same thing. It's how we get there. And I think we get there by giving a helping hand up, not a handout. Handouts, just like the vouchers, go on forever and ever. Teach the man to fish. Don't give him fish. A lot of these programs are just broken and they go on forever and ever because there is a crony system. Only certain people are allowed to bid on contracts. These are ways that we can save money, reduce taxes, and put the money where it's needed. Workforce development programs, medical care, more clinics for the people. Is my time up, or what do we get? 2.5 minutes, Leonardo?
No, yeah, you're good. I mean,
okay. So I'm sure that what Senator Lamb says today, I will agree with. It's just my view on how we're going to get there, how we're going to work smart with the money, how we're going to create workforce development programs. I've done workforce development programs through Baltimore City Department of Social Services, and it was very successful. And they were like, how did you get everybody a job, Bob? I mean, what do you mean? Wasn't I supposed to? Yeah, but everybody got a job. I said, well, I was doing culinary training. People were getting ServSafe certified, alcohol awareness certified. I called LifeBridge. They operate 4 hospitals. Of course, they wanted to take all my students. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you. Senator Lamb, same question for you, and that is just talk about how you would work in a nonpartisan manner with legislators whose party differs from your own.
Yeah, thank you, Leonardo. That's a good question. It's an important one too, I think, for the environment that we're in. Certainly, things have become more partisan, as everyone can tell. I think one of the benefits of serving at the state level is that the rhetoric is pulled down a few notches. In Annapolis, there are still a lot of opportunities to work across the aisle. The vast majority of bills pass with bipartisan support. A good number of them pass unanimously. These are not controversial issues when you're working on issues to support local neighborhoods or issues to help improve how government agencies work, or bread and butter issues about local investment. So those all pass with almost unanimous support all the time. But it is important to work across the aisle because I think folks that have different opinions play an important role in the legislature. They provide a counterbalance and provide input. And we try not to take it personally. We know that there are a lot of legislators coming from different areas of the state, and they're really just representing their constituents. That it's nothing personal, so to speak. It's just that good people have different opinions sometimes. And so we do have to work with folks. I think some of the areas that I've been able to work with some colleagues across the aisle is on accountability and transparency. And as I mentioned earlier, that this is a bipartisan issue. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. All of us want to make sure that the money that the state is spending works well, is effective in the programs that they are putting forward, and is not being misspent, and making sure that there's good accountability and transparency across all state agencies, across all programs throughout the state's budget is incredibly important. And as the Joint Audits Committee chairperson, I've seen that. We've been able to work with a lot of colleagues to help improve the effectiveness and efficiency of state government, and we hope to continue to be able to do that. Another area where I think we can work more closely now is with a new administration coming in, the departments for the last 8 years have not been very forthcoming with opinions and thoughts on how we can improve legislation. Writing legislation is a multi-pronged process. A lot of stakeholders are involved, and it's tough when we as legislators are writing legislation and trying to improve programs without the input of the folks that are actually implementing it. The departments and agencies over the last 8 years have been told to not provide input. So more than any other administration in the past, they've not been able to give letters of support or letters of opposition to legislation that's come forward. I think under a new administration, this will change, and we look forward to working with them as well. And that will help provide some better input into the legislation that we do pass.
Thank you. And so we're going to shift the gears again a little bit and move and talk about economic development and our state's economic competitiveness. And so, and so this question is ultimately just how would you rate the state's competitive position in relationship to our neighboring states regarding attracting new employers and retaining and growing existing employers? And ultimately why? So in your opinion, talk about how you would rate the state's competitive position in relationship to our neighboring states regarding attracting new employers and retaining and growing existing employers. And we'll start with you, Senator Lamb.
Sure. So it is an important question because we recognize that the vast majority of folks are employed in private businesses. And so we do need to support businesses here in the state. We do want to bring businesses in. And over the last few years, we have made strides with policies that we hope will continue to bring businesses here to the state. In fact, over the last few years, we've actually brought Maryland up when it comes to the top states that do business, for example. I think we've moved up almost 20 spots to be number 12 for the best state to do business in the nation. We still have a ways to go, though. I think there's more that we can continue to do to help support both large and small businesses. I think what a lot of folks are keyed into are taxes, and taxes are certainly one component of that. And we will continue to try to make strides to make it easier for businesses to be able to continue to function here in the state. But beyond taxes, there are additional factors that I think we also need to focus on, work on to make it easier for businesses. That includes breaking down some of the red tape, some of the bureaucratic, levels that are there make it difficult for businesses to move quickly, to be nimble, to be able to respond to markets and the environment. And so I think when we look at some of the departments and agencies that the state has, we need to make sure that they're responsive, that they are keyed into customer service, not just for constituents, but also for businesses. We'll continue to do that too. Two, I think it's also important to have a good talent pool, and that's where education really comes into play. When you look at some of these high-tech cyber and IT type jobs, it's important to have a good public school system, important to also have good programs at the higher ed level so that this talent pool can be trained and also gain the experience they need through apprenticeships and fellowships and other internships, and then be able to stay in the state. So you need to have a base of human capital that's there to be able to support businesses as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier at the top, making sure that we address affordability and livability. To be able to retain people is important because we know from, I've heard from many business leaders that it's tough to find the right people, but then it's also tough to keep them. And if you can't retain them in the state because the state is less competitive than other states, then it becomes challenging to be able to keep your workforce here, and that churn of finding new people can really make it a struggle for businesses. So those are a few things that I think we need to focus on in this coming session, and we hope to be able to do that.
Thank you. And we're going to stay here certainly on the economic development round, but Bob, I want to hear your thoughts. Same question, and that is just how you would rate the state's competitive position as it relates to our neighbors from an economic development standpoint, whether that's recruitment or retention and expansion.
Well, Maryland is not competitive with our neighbor states like Virginia and Delaware. We rank like 35th overall in states in the economy. We're 22nd in crime. And, being one of the 13 original colonies and having a deep water port, you would think that Maryland would be the shining jewel of the East Coast, but we're not. It used to be growing up. If you told someone, if you were out of town and you said, "Oh, I'm from Baltimore," to be like, "Oh man, the Orioles, steamed crabs." Now when I say I'm from Baltimore, they're like, "Oh my God, what about the murder rates?" Well, I say, "Oh well, and it just you have to have a good advertising or marketing program." And unfortunately, not that it's Senator Lamb's fault, but our world view or nationwide view of Baltimore has gone down. And Baltimore being the hub of our state, it isn't helping us. So, as Senator Lamb said, you have to have reasonable taxes, you have to have great education, and not just, it has to be a world class education because today's world is global. It's not just your state or your local community. We need students that are going to be able to go out and be efficient in coding, medical things. I'm working right now, and this will be part of another question, and that's on the climate change. We have to, as I said earlier, think outside the box. We can't continue to use fossil fuels. But getting back onto the question, is Maryland competitive? Absolutely not. That's why when you see tractor and trailers get on the road, they're tagged out of Maine. That's why when people form corporations, they form them in Delaware. We need to be ready in all aspects: affordable housing, low crime, reasonable taxes, and we need to stop development until the infrastructure can catch up. Nobody wants to come to a locality where you're bumper to bumper traffic to get to work. This is just Howard County was a great place, and that's why people moved here. We had world class education, we had great topography, we had great everything. But now we got kids going to school in trailers, we got people sitting in bumper to bumper traffic. It's just not the same. We got to get back to basics and use common sense.
Thank you. And so we're going to stay here and so we've heard, obviously kind of difference of, I guess, opinions and maybe even different sources cited just in terms of, our rankings and what have you. But regardless of that, if you're elected, in this case, Bob, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
To deal with some of these maybe perception issues or even real as it relates to maybe cost of doing business and so forth. Specifically, what might be some policies or things that you would consider or introduce to demonstrate, greater support for the employer community?
Well, the small businesses are the largest employer in this country. There's over 33 million small businesses in the United States of America, which makes that rank as the number one employer. Small businesses employ well over 62 million people. And every year, small businesses create over 520,000 new jobs. But yet, when programs come out to support businesses, it's always for like Northrop Grumman, it's for Chevrolet. It's like, let's bail out General Motors. Let's have programs that support the biggest employer, which is the small business person. So I'd like to look into that and have a special cabinet post or something to work closely with small business people. When they're your largest employer, that's who I think you need to focus on. And another part of that is create workforce development programs so that the businesses in Maryland, as Senator Lamb touched on earlier, you've got to have a source of people to support your businesses. If you drive up and down Route 1 or anywhere in this area, every mile you'll see a sign, help wanted, help wanted, help wanted. So, if you don't have a workforce pool, why would you move here? We lost the oldest privately owned company. It was the gun company. They had 150. Let's see, what was it? It was the Italian name. They had 150 employees. They left Maryland because of the taxes. So a lot of companies don't do business in Baltimore anymore because of the high cost and the shortage of labor. So Norfolk has stolen a lot of our business. For one thing, there's workers down there, and it's a shorter trip for the ships to come up to Chesapeake Bay. but they would rather come to Baltimore because we had the rail hub and the road hubs. They'd rather unload in Baltimore because once their product gets here, it can be distributed. It's not so easy in Norfolk. So these are things I'd like to really concentrate on. And having a 501(c) nonprofit myself and having done workforce development, this is something I think we could partner with companies like Home Depot and Lowe's to help do a quasi, a joint venture, say, in workforce development programs where the people could get paid. I know I'm running a little bit over, but when I was doing the workforce development programs, I wasn't able to pay the students. Although some of them worked for me, I had 4 restaurants in Camden Yards. These people sometimes would spend 10, 12 hours working for me, and I couldn't pay them because if I paid them, they would lose their temporary cash assistance. That does not make sense.
Thank you, Bob. So, Senator Lamb, same question, and that is getting into specifics in terms of policies or things that you would either introduce or consider that would demonstrate greater support for employers. As we talk, continue to talk about this competitiveness and reputation and so forth.
Right. So it's a good question, and as I mentioned, it's not just about taxes. I think there's more that we as a state can do to, in addition to addressing that, to also support businesses, whether large or small. I think it is important for our state's departments and agencies to be responsive to businesses. I was just speaking with a business owner in Howard County the other day who was trying to start a new kind of event venue in Columbia. And they were running into red tape because the state agencies that handled easements and the historical trust wasn't being quite as responsive. And they were waiting months to be able to get the permits that they needed to be able to do the work to transition the facility that they had into an event venue. And so it's things like that where you multiply that times thousands of times where businesses are struggling because they are having a difficult time getting departments and agencies to respond to them. It's unfair. It's not an effective way to do business. And so as the chair of the Joint Audits Committee, accountability is really important, making sure that our state agencies and departments are responsive not just to human constituents, but also to employers and business owners is incredibly important as well, so that they can get the business done that they are looking to do. I think transportation is also important. We have many jobs here in the state where it's difficult to reach them. We have many people who want those jobs and they have a difficult time getting there, whether it's because of the commute time or traffic. There's also a concern that they don't have access to easy mass transit. And I think we as a state can certainly do more to bring and make these jobs more accessible in kind of the central areas of the state, particularly around BWI. There's a lot of, I've talked to a lot of businesses there who are looking to hire, but they also recognize that it's hard for their employees to be able to get there, or potential employees to get there. Human infrastructure is another important piece of that, whether it's supporting our public schools through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future or reinvesting in our public school infrastructure through the Build to Learn Act. There's also more that we will continue to do when it comes to higher ed, making sure that we keep college tuition costs affordable. But also for those who want to go directly into the workforce, we have put additional funding into workforce development and apprenticeship programs, ones where people can still really learn a skill and a trade and be able to make a good living, being able to stay in the state as well. And so human infrastructure is incredibly important for businesses, small and large, to have the skill set that they need to be able to fill those positions. So let me stop there and hand it back to Leonardo.
Thank you, Senator. And so we're going to shift a little bit, but still it's tied to business. And that is, one of the bills that we saw passed last year was the Time to Care Act. And that was, related to, family paid medical leave and so forth. And one of the things that certainly I think I can say is that many businesses have been supportive of the concept, with family leave, but certainly with the passage of the Time to Care Act and some of the unknowns and as it relates to the legislation, it created a good bit of I guess, consternation in terms of just some of the uncertainties and unanswered questions related to the bill. And so this is one of those things we will get kind of specific on what, just say some of your thoughts and even some of the things that you may be prepared to do to try to address some of the confusion and uncertainty related to the Time to Care Act. And we'll start with you, Senator Lamb, on this one.
All right. So it's an important question. It's a bill that we passed last session to create a paid family and medical leave program here in the state. And we also recognize that it is important for families, but also important for businesses. Paid leave does help with worker retention, for example, helping reduce kind of the churn of employees where there's a huge amount of cost that goes into finding new employees. Having paid leave policies helps them stay in their jobs. It also helps improve worker productivity. It means that people that have health issues have the time to be able to take, to be able to get better, to be more productive, or to be able to care for their child or loved one who may be sick so that they can focus on their job when they get back there. It also improves employee loyalty morale. And so these are all important things that we looked at when we set up the program. That said, with any new piece of legislation, there certainly can be improvements that can be made to it. And I think all of us in the legislature are open to helping improve this legislation. I think oftentimes when we pass legislation, we try to get as much input from all the stakeholders and try to account for the variations and differences. But it's also difficult to craft a one-size-fits-all program. And so we recognize that if there are ways to be able to help address certain industries or certain types of businesses that may not fit that box, we're certainly open to modifications to the program going forward. It's new, right? It just started this past year. And as with any new process, I think we're open to input and feedback from those who will be using it. And, with any stakeholders that might want to come forward, I think we're certainly willing to put additional legislation in to help make sure that there's a good infrastructure and structure in place to be able to support businesses and also support families who are using these benefits. So I think we're willing to, we're open to other ideas and other suggestions. I think the program is here to stay. It's one that we feel and care deeply about, and for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. But we also recognize that, there's certainly more that can be done with legislation. And that's why legislation is kind of an iterative process, right? We continue to seek feedback. We continue to modify bills, modify pieces of the statute, modify laws that are already in existence. In fact, the vast majority of bills that we have are not bills that are creating new things. They're actually just modifying and fixing and helping individual people and stakeholders and businesses in bills that already, in laws that already exist, rather. And so I think this is part of that iterative process that we will continue to work with various stakeholders to help hone.
Thank you. And so, same question for you, Bob. And this is related to the recently passed Time to Care Act or Family and Paid Medical Leave Bill, and ultimately addressing some of the uncertainties and confusion around that bill and so forth. And so just what are your thoughts and what are you prepared to do to try to address some of those issues the next session?
Well, as you stated in the beginning, it's a concept. And as Senator Lamb says, things get modified. The concept is great. The need is definitely there. I think it was for employers with 15 or more employees, I believe. So first of all, I think that it was kind of rushed through the General Assembly a little bit. And even though they were zeroed in and focused on the program, for the small business owner, I think there was maybe too many strings attached, or maybe it wasn't, let's say, launched properly. What I would like to see with something like this program, when you cut out some of the programs that are wasteful, there's a lot of contracts that to have a 20 or 30% cost overrun is no big deal. In the restaurant business, if you tell somebody it's a pizza for $12, you can't give them a bill that says it's $14. It's $12. It has to be delivered at $12. These contractors that do business with the state of Maryland, you put a bid in, that's your bid. You got to live up to it. So we have over 980 companies outside of the state of Maryland doing business in Maryland. Those jobs need to go to Marylanders. We pay a company out of the state to change light bulbs on the highway. We have to hire police chiefs from New Orleans. We have to hire school superintendents from out of state. We need to keep the dollar in Maryland, in Howard County. So I know I got off track a little bit, but I'm going to tie this in somehow. I think we need to set up a program similar to MAFE, where you couldn't get insurance somewhere else, but MAFE has to take you. I think we need to direct some money, whether it's federal or state funds, it probably will be federal, into an insurance program that we run to help fund programs like medical leave. And it has to be simplified so that a guy that's working 16, 18 hours a day in his bakery, he can just open up a brochure and go, oh, I get it. I put in $1 and they put in $2. So more importantly, as a small business person, if you want to retain your employees, you better make them part of your family. You better get to know them. You got to get to know their family. You have to be a family. Then they don't leave you. So that's what small businesses do. But, when you're working for these giant corporations, they give you a pink slip. It's AMF. See you later. There's no hugs, kisses, or goodbyes.
Thanks, Bob. So we're going to now talk about two other areas, I guess, with the remaining time that we have that both of you have talked about, and that's education and the environment. And so first on the education side, we saw, I guess it was, and the sessions are kind of running together, but I want to say it might have been probably maybe a session or two ago where we had the implementation of the blueprint. And ultimately part of it is, and the long and short of it is looking at investing in Maryland's education infrastructure and future, whether it be related to K through 12 and early childhood and teacher salaries, et cetera. But the question in this case is just talk a little bit about your thoughts on Blueprint, particularly as we move forward with continued implementation, and how do we pay for it, and just overall education funding in and of itself. And so, Bob, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, to me, everything starts with two E's. And Senator Lamb's probably tired of me saying this. It's education. And the second E is economics. And education is the driver or the controller of economics. It's not, can we afford to support our education programs? We have to, because it drives everything. I think that, and Senator Lamb touched on it earlier, in my generation, everybody, you got to go to college. Well, guess what? Now the automobile mechanics and the plumbers, you're lucky to even get them to say hi to you. They're making more than the teachers. So, for me, the teachers and the first responders, they're the real heroes. They're the ones that we got to retain for our state and for our county. They've got to get paid more money than they're making now. This is ridiculous that a garbage worker makes as much or more than a teacher. My son's a firefighter, and he puts his life on the line to rescue people for the money they make. We're gonna run out of first responders. I'm telling you, we gotta redirect our priorities in this. Education is the key to everything, and I think that there can be a lot more workforce development programs that are training people for real life jobs. Not everybody wants to sit in a cubicle. Not everybody wants to be in front of a computer all day long, and I'm one of those people. And there's one more thing I'd like to touch on, and if I'm off track, let me know, and that's election integrity. We've got 9 days of voting now. We've got 11 drop boxes in Howard County. You can register the same day that you vote. We have the same amount of employees in the Board of Elections that we had when there was 1 day of voting and just one ballot. Now they've got almost 45% of mail-in ballots. You lose the chain of custody when these people are doing 10 times the amount of work that they did, say, 20 years ago. Do we really need people to register to vote the day of the election? So now they had to put it on the internet so they could keep track of who's registered. Once you put your election on the internet, it's opening up for fraud. And I see my time's up. But anyway, I just wanted to touch base on election integrity, because to me, that's very, very important.
Thank you, Bob. And so, Senator Lamb, going back to the question as it relates to education and implementation, particularly of blueprint and funding. So just share your thoughts there. And you're going to have to, you actually still muted.
All right, there we go. So education is, I think, something we can all agree upon is incredibly important, and making sure that we get education right is not only important for now, but it's important for the future, because these are the students and the children that we're going to be educating and training and providing the experiences and the skills that they need to become the workforce of tomorrow. And so making sure that we have a strong public school system is incredibly important. That's what we did with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. When you look at the last 10 years or so of where our public schools have been, they have fell notches. And that is because of a kind of broad swath of issues that we try to address in the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It includes making sure that we retain our best teachers, that we bring teachers into the profession. As Bob has kind of cited, it is difficult to be a teacher these days. It is difficult to make ends meet as a teacher, and that's not fair. These are the folks that are training and educating our children. There's probably nothing more important than making sure our children have the education and the skills that they need for to be productive in society. And so what we did with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future is actually provide more funding to retain our best teachers, to make sure that they're higher standards, that they're better levels of accountability for our teachers, so that our students have the best possible education. We also invested in pre-K programs and early childhood programs. We recognize that for many folks who may not have access to early childhood education, having these types of programs in place sets their kids off to a lifetime of learning and achievement that wouldn't otherwise be the case had they not had pre-K available to them. And so we're going to make universal pre-K available throughout the state. We've made great strides. There's still more work to be done there. We also recognize that when it comes to the learning environment, it's important to have good, safe, modern learning facilities for our students. And that's why we put billions of dollars into the Build to Learn Act. We recognize that a lot of our school infrastructure is aging, and with more kids in our school system, with more people moving into the state with families, it's important for us to be able to have the dollars for school renovations and also brand new construction. That's how we're able to have a new high school 13 here in the county, how we're able to renovate Talbot Springs, and the renovation at Hammond High. Those were all through support that the state offered through the Build to Learn Act. We will continue to do more as well. Let me stop there and turn over to Leonardo.
Thank you. And so we're going to now move it into the environment. And so, the last session we saw a pretty significant environmental legislation that was passed. And certainly, I think as you talk to people, I think there is certainly an understanding and a desire to have, smart policy that certainly protects our environment, clean air, clean water, that minimizes, various emissions and so forth. Yet, we certainly know there has to be some type of balance as we look to implementation of these and the cost on whether that be institutions, businesses that have facilities and so forth. So just that being said, share just your thoughts in terms of maybe pending or future legislation, and ultimately, how do we balance both protection of the environment, but yet the economic realities of what some of these policy implementations how they will impact business as we try to move forward. Whether that's, as an example, moving from gas to electric or what have you. But just kind of share your thoughts in terms of maybe potential environmental legislation that you would champion, and how do we balance between, again, supporting obviously the environment, but yet still being mindful of economic impact to employers. And I'm sorry, you go first on this one.
Yeah, sure, I can start. So I think you touched on a really important piece there at the end, Leonardo. I think with balance, I think the one of the challenges with legislation is that you have to try to strike the right balance. And I think we did that with the Climate Solutions Now Act that passed earlier this year. It really sets goals for some incremental change to come. So it sets an interim goal, for example, of a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases, 60% below the 2006 levels of emissions that we had, and to set that out by almost 10 years. That goal is now a goal for 2031. And then for a net zero goal here in the state to be net zero energy wise by 2045. It also sets some building energy standards to be for large buildings to be net zero by 2040. It requires a state passenger fleet, for example, to be zero emissions by 2031, again, almost 10 years out. Creates a pilot electric bus, school bus program. And then it also helps provide for improvements in our electrical grid system, in our electrical infrastructure, to help further decarbonization take place later on in the future. These are all kind of goalposts that have been set into the future, years off, so that we can now go in afterwards to help provide the structure and the infrastructure, so to speak, in place, and the interim guidelines and goalposts to reach those standards in 10 years or in 15 years. And so we'll be looking at legislation this coming session and probably for the next few years to figure out how we can support businesses, how we can support state agencies, how we can support consumers to be able to reach those goals of further decarbonization, further electrification, and moving away from fossil fuels. These are not easy because we've had our buildings and facilities and our homes really relying on fossil fuels. And so it's going to take years, many years, to be able to kind of turn the ship and help support this change. But I think what we did with the Climate Solutions Now Act is really set those goals forward so that we can now come in to be able to offer additional programs and services to make sure that everyone can reach those goals. Climate change is real. I think when we look at some of the challenges across the world, we recognize whether it's Hurricane Ian or droughts that are taking place, that we need to address this, and this is one way that Maryland can do its part.
Thank you. So to you, Bob, your thoughts as it relates to climate change legislation and ultimately how we have policy that obviously protects the environment, but yet is conscious of the fiscal and economic impacts on employers.
Well, it's not just the employers, it affects everybody, the bees, the bugs, and everything. And I do think that we're headed in the right direction. And as Senator touched on the goal to reduce the emissions by 60%, I think we're probably on pace to achieve that. And also, we have to change. There's no doubt about it. We are destroying the planet that we live on. 2/3 of the rainforest has been destroyed. I mean, I know we don't live in the rainforest zone, but it still affects us. So carbon emission will be reduced or almost totally removed. What we have to do, and they're already working on it. My question is, what's producing the electricity for these electric cars? Carbon fuels. So then we have to look toward hydrogen. We have to look toward solar for the future. Also, through better insulation for housings, have a fleet of state vehicles that the senator touched on that are not producing a carbon footprint. That's all in the works. And I think we will actually achieve this because there's methods now that are being built on the Eastern Shore that can take waste, convert it into a liquid, and then later on convert the liquid into a usable gas that leaves zero carbon footprint. This process could heat an entire city for half the cost without affecting the environment. Also, it's taking chicken waste, which gets into the water system on the Eastern Shore. The nitrogen is terrible. It gets into the Chesapeake Bay, the Choptank River, et cetera, et cetera. So things are in the works, and I do think it will be successful. More hydrogen, more solar, other uses of smart technology, we will reach the goal. And I think people are becoming more and more aware. We spent a lot of money on bike lanes. I think maybe that money could have been better spent. I don't see people using bike lanes. This isn't Europe. People have cars here. If you work closer to home, if we have programs to incentivize businesses and people to work close to home, where they could either ride share or walk to work or use local bus transportation. You know, you see our buses, the size of them. Half the time, there's only about 10% people on a. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So this will be our last kind of closing comments here. And so because, Bob, we started with you first, Senator Lamb, we're going to start with you first on this last one. And really, it's a open-ended, and that is just if there is anything that perhaps you'd like to share regarding your platform, qualifications, priorities that maybe we didn't ask that you'd like to share as we close out.
Sure. So thank you, Leonardo, and I want to thank you and the Chamber for organizing this. This is a series of forums for various candidates and elected officials to be able to participate in. It's a really important piece in being able to have good public discourse and dialogue with not only those candidates that are running, but also with the public. So I hope folks have found this informative. Want to thank you for organizing this as well. So, you know, like I said, I think I've had a strong record over the last 4 years serving the Senate and the 4 years before that in the House of making sure that we continue to help our local communities, whether that's supporting local businesses, supporting working families, helping bring folks into our educational system to help train our next generation of children, or to make sure that healthcare is affordable. We have a strong track record of working with folks to be able to assist families that are in need. And we recognize that there's still more work to be done, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on technology, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it's on education. We hope to be able to continue to work with folks throughout the General Assembly across the aisle with the new administration, and also the departments and agencies to not only hold them accountable, to also work with them with input that they can provide to make sure that we continue to craft the best possible legislation that can help our residents here in Maryland and also here in Howard County. And so I hope to have the privilege to be able to continue to work in the Senate of Maryland. It's really been an honor being the only physician there, particularly over the last few years when it's come to COVID. But there's a lot of other important issues that we hope to be able to continue to work on. I'm proud to be running with my colleagues, Delegate Hill and Delegate Feldmark, and hope to have your support when you go to the polls on November 8th, if not before. And so with that, let me close and just thank everyone for attending and pass it back to Leonardo.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. And I'm sorry about that, wrong button. And with that, Bob, your closing comments. And again, anything that you'd like to share regarding your qualifications or priorities that maybe we have not asked.
Well, you know, once again, I'm not knocking Senator Lamb. We all want the same thing. I would like people to consider me because politicians always say, I'm endorsed by this union, I'm endorsed by the teachers, I'm endorsed by the police, I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club. I'm not endorsed by anyone. Also, I'm not owned by anyone. I'm not indebted to a developer. The old saying, it goes, follow the money, and not against Senator Lamb. I will be a watchdog for the voters of Maryland. I will bring in maybe a different outlook. I will, you know, the word crossing the aisle is just, it's just so much overused, bipartisan. I'm going to cross over the aisle. If you look at my webpage, bobcocky.com, look for the things I stand for. I think I can bring a different mix into the General Assembly. Um, Senator Lamb, good luck to you, and I'll see you tonight. This forum has been the best one I've ever been on. Hopefully, it will be my last one. The questions were great. The moderator was great, and win, lose, or draw. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to thank the both of you for spending your Friday morning with me and with us, the viewers here in Howard County. And so, as a few closing comments on my end, the first is, and I think you've heard it a little bit, but one, make sure that all of your registration information is updated by the 18th of October. Also, certainly early voting will be starting, and actually for any information regarding the elections and so forth, want to encourage you to visit elections.maryland.gov, and certainly there you can find any and everything related to the election process in Maryland, specifically even into Howard County and so forth. But certainly want to thank all of you for joining, and certainly want to just encourage everyone, regardless as to who you vote for, please go out and vote, exercise that right. You'll always hear me say too many men and women bled and died for us to have the right to be able to go and vote and participate in the political process. And so again, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you, Leonardo.
Thank you.
See you tonight, Senator Lamb.
Okay. See you, Bob.